The early life of Joseph Stalin covers the period from Stalin's birth, on December 18, 1878, until the October Revolution on November 7, 1917. Born Ioseb Jughashvili in Gori, Georgia, to a cobbler and a house cleaner, he grew up in the city and attended school there before moving to Tiflis to join the Tiflis Seminary. While a student at the seminary, he embraced Marxism and became an avid follower of Vladimir Lenin. He left the seminary to become a revolutionary. After being marked by Russian secret police for his activities, he became a full-time revolutionary and was involved in various criminal activities, which included robbery, kidnapping, and arson. He became one of the Bolsheviks' chief operatives in the Caucasus, organizing paramilitaries, spreading propaganda, and utilizing extortion. Stalin was captured and exiled to Siberia numerous times, but often escaped. He became one of Lenin's closest associates, which helped him rise to the heights of power after the Russian Revolution. In 1913, Stalin was exiled to Siberia for the final time and remained in exile until the February Revolution of 1917 led to the overthrow of the Russian Empire. He was baptized on December 29, 1878, and christened Ioseb. He was known by the diminutive So. His parents were Ekaterina and Bessarion Jughashvili. He was their third child. The first two, Mikhail and Georgy, had died in infancy. Stalin's father, Bessarion, was a shoemaker and owned a workshop that at one point employed as many as 10 people, but which slid into ruin as Stalin grew up. Besso had specialized in producing traditional Georgian footwear and did not produce the European-style shoes that were becoming increasingly fashionable. This, combined with the deaths of his previous 2 infant sons, precipitated his decline into alcoholism. The family found themselves living in poverty. The couple had to leave their home and moved into 9 different rented rooms over 10 years. Bessarion also became violent toward his family. To escape the abusive relationship, Kieck took Stalin and moved into the house of a family friend, Father Christopher Charkviani. She worked as a house cleaner and launderer for several local families who were sympathetic to her plight. Kieck was a strict but affectionate mother to Stalin. She was a devout Christian, and both she and her son regularly attended church services. In 1884, Stalin contracted smallpox, which left him with facial pockmarks for the rest of his life. Charkviani's teenage sons taught Stalin the Russian language. Kieck was determined to send her son to school, something that none of the family had previously achieved. In late 1888, when Stalin was 10, he enrolled at the Gori church school. This was normally reserved for the children of clergy, but Charkviani ensured that Stalin received a place by claiming that the boy was the son of a deacon. This may be the reason why, in 1934, Stalin claimed to have been the son of a priest. There were many local rumors that Besso was not Stalin's real father, which in later life Stalin himself encouraged. Stalin biographer Simon Sebag Montefiore nonetheless thought it likely that Besso was the father, in part due to the strong physical resemblance that they shared. Besso eventually attacked a policeman while drunk, which resulted in the authorities ejecting him from Gori. He moved to Tiflis, where he worked at the Adelkinov shoe factory. Although Kieck was poor, she ensured that her son was well dressed when he went to school, likely through the financial support of family friends. As a child, Stalin exhibited a number of idiosyncrasies. When happy, he would, for instance, jump around on one leg while clicking his fingers and yelling aloud. He excelled academically and also displayed talent in painting and drama classes. He began writing poetry and was a fan of the work of Georgian nationalist writer Raphael Eristavi. He was also a choir boy, singing both in church and at local weddings. A childhood friend of Stalin's later recalled that he was the best but also the naughtiest pupil in the class. He and his friends formed a gang and often fought with other local children. He caused mischief. In one incident, he ignited explosive cartridges in a shop, and in another he tied a pan to the tail of a woman's pet cat. When Stalin was 12, he was seriously injured after having been hit by a phaeton. He was hospitalized in Tiflis for several months and sustained a lifelong disability to his left arm. His father subsequently kidnapped him and enrolled him as an apprentice cobbler in the factory. This would be Stalin's only experience as a worker. According to Stalin's biographer Robert Service, this was Stalin's first experience with capitalism, and it was raw, harsh, and dispiriting. Several priests from Gori retrieved the boy, after which Bissau cut all contact with his wife and son. In February 1892, Stalin's school teachers took him and the other pupils to witness the public hanging of several peasant bandits. Stalin and his friends sympathized with the condemned. The event left a deep and lasting impression on him. Stalin had decided that he wanted to become a local administrator so that he could deal with the problems of poverty that affected the population around Gori. Despite his Christian upbringing, he had become an atheist after contemplating the problem of evil and learning about evolution through Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species. In July 1893, Stalin passed his exams, and his teachers recommended him to the Tiflis seminary. Due to his impoverished circumstances, the seminary would provide Soso with the best, well-rounded education he could ever hope to achieve. Keek took him to the city, where they rented a room. Stalin applied for a scholarship to enable him to attend the school. They accepted him as a half-boarder, meaning that he was required to pay a reduced fee of 40 rubles a year. This was still a substantial sum for his mother, and he was likely financially assisted once more by family friends. He officially enrolled at the school in August 1894. He joined 600 trainee priests, who boarded in dormitories containing between 20 and 30 beds. Stalin was set apart by being 3 years older than most of the other first-year students, although a number of his fellow students had also attended the Gori Church School. At Tiflis, Stalin was again an academically successful pupil, gaining high grades in his subjects. Completion of the seminary course required a variety of subjects, including Russian literature, secular history, mathematics, Latin, Greek, Church Slavonic singing, Georgian and Mauritian singing, and Holy Scripture. As students progressed, they were taught more concentrated theological subjects such as ecclesiastical history, liturgy, homiletics, comparative theology, moral theology, practical pastoral work, didactics, and church singing. To supplement his income, he sang in a choir, with his father sometimes asking him for his earnings. During the holidays, he would return to Gori to spend time with his mother. Tiflis was a multi-ethnic city in which Georgians were a minority. The seminary was controlled by the Georgian Orthodox Church, which was part of the Russian Orthodox Church and subordinate to the ecclesiastical authorities in St. Petersburg. The priests employed to work there were largely reactionary, anti-Semitic Russian nationalists. They banned the speaking of Georgian by pupils, insisting that Russian be used at all times. Stalin was, however, proud to be Georgian. He continued writing poetry and took several of his poems to the office of the newspaper Iveria. There, they were read by Ilya Chavchavadze, who liked them and ensured that 5 were published in the newspaper. Each was published under the pseudonym of Sosilo. Thematically, they dealt with topics like nature, land, and patriotism. According to Montefiore, they became minor Georgian classics and were included in various anthologies of Georgian poetry over the coming years. Montefiore was of the view that their romantic imagery was derivative, but their beauty lay in the delicacy and purity of rhythm and language. Similarly, Robert Service felt that in the original Georgian language, these poems had a linguistic purity recognized by all. Over his years at the seminary, Stalin lost interest in many of his studies, and his grades began to drop. He grew his hair long in an act of rebellion against the school's rules. Seminary records contain complaints that he declared himself an atheist, chatted in class, was late for meals, and refused to doff his hat to monks. He was repeatedly confined to a cell for his rebellious behavior. He had joined a forbidden book club, the Cheap Library, which was active at the school. Among the authors whom he read in this period were Emile Zola, Nikolai Nekrasov, Nikolai Gogol, Anton Chekhov, Leo Tolstoy, Mikhail Saltykov-Shchedrin, Friedrich Schiller, Guy de Maupassant, Honoré de Balzac, and William Makepeace Thackeray. Particularly influential was Nikolai Chernyshevsky's 1863 pro-revolutionary novel, What Is to Be Done? Another influential text was Alexander Kazbeg's The Patricide, with Stalin adopting the nickname Koba from that of the book's bandit protagonist. These works of fiction were supplemented with the writings of Plato and books on Russian and French history. The pseudonym Koba also may have been a tribute to his wealthy benefactor, Yakobai Koba Egnatashvili, who paid for his schooling at the Tiflis seminary. He also read Capital, the 1867 book by German philosopher Karl Marx, and tried learning German so that he could read the works of Marx and his collaborator Friedrich Engels in the language in which they were originally written. He had soon devoted himself to Marxism, the socio-political theory that Marx and Engels had developed. Marxism provided him with a new way of interpreting the world. The ideology was on the rise in Georgia, one of various forms of socialism then developing in opposition to the governing czarist authorities. At night, he attended secret meetings of local workers, most of whom were ethnic Russians. He was introduced to Silabistro Silva Gibladze, the Marxist founder of Mesame Dasi, a Georgian socialist group. One of his poems was published in the group's newspaper, Kvali. Stalin found many socialists active in the Russian Empire to be too moderate, but was attracted by the writings of a Marxist who used the pseudonym of Chalin. This was Vladimir Lenin. It is also possible that he had pursued romantic and sexual relationships with women in Tiflis. Years later, there was some suggestion that he might have fathered a girl named Praskovia Pasha Mikhailovskaya around this period. In April 1899, Stalin left the seminary at the end of term and never returned, although the school encouraged him to come back. Through his years of attendance, he had effectively received a classical education without ultimately qualifying as a priest. In later years, he sought to glamorize his leaving, claiming that he had been expelled from the seminary for his revolutionary activities. Stalin next worked as a tutor for middle-class children, but earned a meager living. In October 1899, Stalin began work as a meteorologist at the Tiflis Meteorological Observatory, where his school friend Vano Ketskaveli was already employed. In this position, he worked during the night for a wage of 20 rubles a month. The position entailed little work and allowed him to read while on duty. According to Robert Service, this was Stalin's only period of sustained employment until after the October Revolution. In the early weeks of 1900, Stalin was arrested and held in Miteki Fortress. The official explanation given was that Bissau had not paid his taxes and that Stalin was responsible for ensuring that they were paid, although it may be that this was a cryptic warning from the police, who were aware of Stalin's Marxist revolutionary activities. As soon as she learned of the arrest, Kieck came to Tiflis, while some of Stalin's wealthier friends helped to pay the taxes and get him out of prison. Stalin had attracted a group of radical young men around him, giving classes in socialist theory in a flat on Solalaki Street. Stalin was involved in organizing a secret nocturnal mass meeting for May Day 1900, in which around 500 workers met in the hills outside the city. There, Stalin gave his first major public speech, in which he called for strike action, something that the Mesame Dasi opposed. Following his prompting, the workers at the railway depots and Adelkinov's shoe factory went on strike. By this point, the Tsarist secret police, the Okhrana, were aware of Stalin's activities within Tiflis revolutionary milieu. On the night of March 21 to 22, 1901, the Okhrana arrested a number of Marxist leaders in the city. Stalin himself escaped arrest. He was traveling toward the observatory aboard a tram when he recognized plainclothes police around the building. He decided to remain on the tram and get off at a later stop. He did not return to the observatory and henceforth lived off of donations given by political sympathizers and friends. Stalin next helped plan a large May Day demonstration for 1901, in which 3,000 workers and leftists marched from Soldiers' Bazaar to Yerevan Square. Demonstrators clashed with Cossack troops, resulting in 14 protesters being seriously wounded and 50 arrested. After this event, Stalin escaped several further attempts to arrest him. To evade detection, he slept in at least 6 different apartments and used the alias of David. Soon after, one of Stalin's associates, Stepan Shamian, organized the assassination of the railway boss director who resisted the strikers. In November 1901, Stalin attended a meeting of the Tiflis Committee of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, where he was elected one of the 8 committee members. The committee then sent Stalin to the port city of Batumi, where he arrived in November 1901. He identified an Okhrana infiltrator who was trying to gain access to the Batumi Marxist circles, and they were subsequently killed. According to Montefiore, this was probably his first murder. In Batumi, Stalin moved around different flats, and it is likely that he had a relationship with Natasha Kurtova, whom he stayed with in Barskana. Stalin's rhetoric proved divisive among the city's Marxists. His Batumi supporters became known as socialists, while he was criticized by those regarded as legals. Some of the legals suspected that Stalin might be an agent provocateur sent by the Tsarist authorities to infiltrate and discredit the movement. In Batumi, Stalin gained employment at Rothschild Refinery Storehouse. On January 4, 1902, the warehouse where he worked was set alight. The company's workers helped to put out the blaze and insisted that they be paid a bonus for doing so. When the company refused, Stalin called a strike. He encouraged revolutionary fervor among workers through a number of leaflets that he had printed in both Georgian and Armenian. On February 17, the Rothschild Company agreed to the strikers' demands, which included a 30% pay rise. On February 23, they then dismissed 389 workers whom they regarded as troublemakers. In response to this latter act, Stalin called for another strike. Many of the strike leaders were arrested by police. Stalin helped to organize a public demonstration outside the prison, which was joined by much of the town. The demonstrators stormed the prison in an attempt to free the imprisoned strike leaders, but were fired upon by Cossack troops. 13 protesters were killed and 54 wounded. Stalin escaped with a wounded man. This event, known as the Batumi Massacre, gained national attention. Stalin then helped to organize a further demonstration for March 12, the day on which the dead were buried. Around 7,000 people took part in the march, which was heavily policed. By this point, the Okhrana had become aware of Stalin's significant role in the demonstrations. On April 5, they arrested him at the house of one of his fellow revolutionaries. Stalin was initially interned in Batumi prison. He soon established himself as a powerful and respected figure within the prison and retained contacts with the outside world. On 2 occasions, his mother visited him. The state prosecutor subsequently ruled that there was insufficient evidence for Stalin being behind the Batumi disturbances, but he was instead indicted for his involvement in revolutionary activities in Tiflis. In April 1903, Stalin led a prison protest against the visit of the Exarch of the Georgian Church. As punishment, he was restricted to solitary confinement before being moved to the stricter Kutaisi prison. There, he gave lectures and encouraged inmates to read revolutionary literature. He organized a protest to ensure that many of those imprisoned for political activities were housed together. On July 9, 1903, the Justice Minister recommended that Stalin be sentenced to 3 years of exile in eastern Siberia. Stalin began his journey east in October, when he boarded a prison steamship at Batumi harbor and traveled via Novorossiysk and Rostov to Irkutsk. He then traveled, by foot and coach, to Novaya Yuta, arriving at the small settlement on November 26. In the town, Stalin lived in the 2-room house of a local peasant, sleeping in the building's larder. There were many other exiled leftist intellectuals in the town, but Stalin eschewed them and preferred drinking alcohol with the petty criminals that had been exiled there. While Stalin was in exile, a split had developed in the RSDLP between the Bolsheviks who backed Lenin and the Mensheviks who backed Julius Martov. Stalin had several attempts to escape Novaya Yuta. On the first attempt, he made it to Balagansk, but suffered from frostbite to his face and was forced to return. On the second attempt, he escaped Siberia and returned to Tiflis. It was while he was in the city that the Russo-Japanese War broke out. In Tiflis, Stalin again lived in the homes of various friends and also attended a Marxist circle led by Lev Kamenev. A number of local Marxists called for Stalin's expulsion from the RSDLP because of his calls for the establishment of a separate Georgian Marxist movement. They saw this as a betrayal of Marxist internationalism and compared it to the views of the Jewish Bundists. Some referred to him as the Georgian Bundist. Stalin was defended by the first Georgian Marxist to officially declare himself a Bolshevik, Mikotes Kakaya, although the latter made the young man publicly renounce his views. He aligned himself with the Bolsheviks, growing to detest many of the Georgian Mensheviks. Menshevism was, however, the dominant revolutionary force in the Southern Caucasus, leaving the Bolsheviks as a minority. Stalin was able to establish a local Bolshevik stronghold in the mining town of Chayachura. At workers' meetings around Georgia, Stalin frequently debated against the Mensheviks. He called for an opposition to interethnic violence, an alliance between the proletariat and peasantry, and in contrast to the Mensheviks, insisted that there could be no compromise with the middle classes in the struggle.